As I grow in my relationship with God, it's made it very clear of Him being love. And He set the example while He's been walking here on the earth, that we are supposed to serve and love others. And sometimes it's super hard to do that, but other times it's really easy. For me, it's been very crucial to let everyone in kind of in every aspect of my life. Being a follower and loving Jesus and serving Jesus doesn't mean that I have a perfect life. It doesn't mean that I have this cookie cutter life. It means inviting people into my mess. But really it comes down to being intentional. Not necessarily choosing out like a certain time period for friends, but it really means being purposeful in every moment that you're living. So during my darkest time, God loved me, and He cared for me and met me where I was at. For me, knowing that and what God has done for me, how could I not do that for others?
All right, so something we wanted to try a little bit different is having me speak on the floor. Hopefully connect with you guys a little closer, because up here it's really high, feels maybe really far away, but wanted to take a moment just to explain why I'm here if you've been coming to One Church more lately. And so today we kick off a new series, and we wanted to have Jess share her story. Because I want to share a little bit about Jess. Jess is someone who her whole life lived in Wisconsin. And that was the life she built. And so her family was there. She went to school there, grew up there. That was her life. And then when this One Church thing became an opportunity that we were looking to start, Jess was one of the first people who said, hey, I'll come with you guys. I'll help start this church with you guys. I'll do all this. Let's just do this thing together, which was really humbling to hear. But something about that, though, is like my family and I, when we came back, we were moving back to an area we were familiar with. We had family, we had some friends already in place. Jess, however, knew nobody except for Danielle and I, pretty much. And so she was moving back here with no connections. There was she had to find a job, a place to live. She had to build friendships. She knew very few people, but she put herself out there to build relationships. She put herself out there to know people, get to know them. And she also opened up her home for people to come into her life as well. Because Jess will be one of the first people to tell you, if you ever sat down and talked with her, how vital relationships are to our lives. If we don't have other people to build into us and us to build into them, we're missing a huge aspect of how God wired us to be. There's something powerful and necessary about people being in our lives and us being in theirs, because relationships are vital to how God has designed us to live this life. And some of the best relationship times are actually formed around the dinner table. How many of you guys would agree with that? Like, there's something about just sitting around a meal together, having relationship time, eating food, having conversations. That's some of the best time to build those relationships. Because here's the thing, we all have a need to eat. When we eat with other people, we let them into our lives because we talk, we share, we laugh, we debate, and life just happens. My mom had a rule growing up. As a kid, after school and out for the day, I wanted to go have fun with my friends. I wanted to go play basketball, whatever that may be. But my mom had this rule, Monday through Thursday, it was a rule in our house. I had to be home for dinner. There was no questions. I couldn't eat at a buddy's house. I had to be home because that was family time. Now, we could always invite friends to come eat dinner with us, but at 5:30, we were going to be around that dinner table in my house, eating dinner as a family. Maybe some friends joined us because there was a chance for us as a family to sit down, to connect, to share about our day, share about our lives, and it was vital for our family. But it was also just a learning experience for me, because now that I've gotten older, I realize how important it is to sit down, have that moment just to pause in the craziness of the day and just build those relationships with people around us. There's something about building those relationships. There's something about a dinner table. There's something about having a seat at the table in those relationships when we eat a meal. That's why we're doing this series called A Seat at the Table over this next month. Because what's about to happen is we see, as relationships are vital, I want you to stay with me on this, we see that food is this universal language for every human being. You can go to any part of this world, any part of this country, not speak the same language, but there's one thing that will unite all of us, and that's food. If you think about it, we all need to eat. We're all going to eat. So we have this food around the dinner tables where relationships happen. And when we invite people to eat with us, we invite them into our lives. And so throughout this series, we're going to use this image as a dinner table as like this metaphor for our lives when it comes to the relationships that we have. And the question we kind of want to raise is this: who has a seat at your table? Who has a seat in your life as you're building it, as you're leading it? And what if we need to treat people in a way that's like inviting them into a meal at our house? Because if you think about it, if you invited someone into your house to have a meal with you, you are letting them into some of the most intimate part of your lives. They see your house, they have these conversations with you, they may use your bathroom to see how messy you are, like all these different things. We invite them into that part of our life. So what does it look like to invite people into our lives? This is why we are going through this series. We were excited about it because this is something we all need. People are vital for our lives, but here's the thing. How many of you guys would agree with me on this? Relationships are very messy and they're very difficult. We have people in our lives that are not very easy to deal with. And relationships can have a tendency to do one of two things. They can give life to us or they can take life away. And I'm sure you can think right now, there's people in your lives, whether it's a coworker or a neighbor or a family member, there's some people that just have the tendency to give you life in that relationship, or there's people just, they're a drain, and you know it. When you see that person, you're like, okay, here we go. Let's get through this type of a thing. And we're about to head into this holiday season. We're about to spend more time with people than any time the rest of the year. Because we see more people, we see more family and friends that maybe we don't see as much throughout the rest of the year because we get together for holiday parties, Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, Christmas, New Year's. So we're around a lot more people than what we're used to. We also deal with more things like people are just busier in general. Traffic is about to go way up over these next 2 months, right? The stores we go to, they're crazy, they're hectic. You deal with strangers and sometimes they're rude and obnoxious and you're like, what is wrong with you? But we have to deal with more and more people than we ever have the rest of the year. Holiday parties at the office. There's always the Christmas party and things like that. Actually, there's Halloween parties. In fact, two of my friends this past week, we were hanging out, and they both had Halloween parties coming up this past week, and they were like, what are you going to bring for your potluck? Like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to bring either. What if we just like made the same thing and just split it in half and we'll take it together? Like just thinking through how they can go, be at this party and bring the food that they have to bring. But we deal with more and more people. Traffic goes up, stores are busier, our relationships get crazy. We interact with our neighbors more. I remember last year it was really cool that our kids, they made cookies. Danielle made cookies and gave them out to all of our neighbors, which then led to our neighbors wanting to return the gifts. So they brought gifts to us. So we had like cookies and wine and all these crazy things going back and forth at different people's houses. It was pretty fun, but you interact with more people than ever before. And so it's a big deal in this holiday season, but here's the deal. The holidays can be really stressful. Because of relationships. They're not easy. They can suck life from us. And so we want to kind of talk through this series of this. How do we not just survive the holiday season with our relationships? How do we actually thrive in them? How does this season of life actually bring life to us and the people that we deal with? Because here's the question. As we invite people into our lives, what kind of life do we invite them into? What kind of life do I invite people into when I let them into a relationship with me? You see, in ancient Jewish culture, meals were a huge relational aspect of their lives. It was in meals that people showed that they had a place in other people's lives in relationships. And so what meals showed was this. Meals showed hospitality. They showed kinship and friendship and goodwill. And they acknowledged one's status that they were valued. When you had someone's place at a table, you were valued as a human being. That's how it worked in Jewish culture. It still kind of works that way too. It was also recognized as a peaceful and non-aggressive situation. So here's the deal. If someone was at odds against each other in the Jewish culture and they invite one another to sit down for a meal to discuss the situation, they knew right away they would be going into a situation that was not aggressive. Because sharing a meal was peaceful. It recognized each other as human. It recognized each other as kin in that moment. And so it's important to recognize that meals had a huge part then, and Jesus lived that out. Now, normally in the Jewish culture, they would have 2 meals a day. They would have one like late morning, in the hottest part of the day to kind of take a break from work, and they would have one in the cool of the evening as well. In the evening, that meal was a lot more extravagant. There was more food prep involved. It was a bigger deal. It was usually a multi-hour dinner time because it was a time for people to build relationships. On top of that, it wasn't just those 2 meals. A lot of their festivals and holidays were surrounded by meals together. It was a big part of that culture. And so throughout this series, we're going to look at some of the meals that Jesus ate and the relationships that he formed and what we can learn from that and how we can live our lives moving forward to make sure that our relationships are not something we're just trying to survive, it's something we actually thrive in. And so the first meal we're going to look at in this series is this. It's the Last Supper. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the meal, the Last Supper. It's the meal that Jesus had with his apostles right before his death. And we're looking at that today. And what's amazing is in the Gospels, the 4 Gospel accounts in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have the story of Jesus. We have their accounts of Jesus' life and what he did. And what's really cool is we have different perspectives of what happened. Because when John was writing his gospel and Luke was writing his, they were writing it from their perspective of how they saw things play out. And so we are actually to look at 2 of the gospel accounts of this Last Supper. And the first one is this, in Luke 22, 14 through 15. It says, when the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table. And he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. You see, the Passover meal was in remembrance of God delivering his people from slavery in Egypt. Jews would gather every year to remember how God delivered them, saved their people, and they would worship God in that. And it was a huge celebration, probably the biggest one of the year. But Jesus knew that this one was special, and here's why. Because as they celebrated God delivering the Jews from Egypt and from their slavery thousands of years before, God was about to deliver his people again through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And Jesus knew that was coming. And so this was an important time for Jesus because he's with his closest friends. It's his last meal, and he's ready to just spend this one more intimate time with his closest friends. But here's what took place we see as the dinner meal is happening. In Luke 22, 24, it says this. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. And so what we have happen here is they are having this meal, and Jesus is with his closest friends. And I know I sound ridiculous as I'm talking through this, but bear with me here. What happened in this meal was there was this U-shaped table. And it stood about 6 to 8 inches off of the ground. So they didn't sit in chairs. What they actually did is they leaned on their side, on their elbow, kind of heads at the table while their feet just kind of dangled out back. And so they would lean and they'd eat, but what would happen is there would always be the head of the table. And the head of the table was, not surprisingly, was Jesus in this situation. It all centered around him. He was the highest esteemed guest in that situation. So it's Jesus and all of his friends around him. But what his friends started arguing about was where their placement was with how far or close they were to Jesus. And so the ones who were further away from Jesus started thinking, you know what? I'm way more important than you. Why do you have that spot closer to Jesus and I'm farther away from him? And the person who was closer was like, no, I'm more important. I have more gifting. Jesus likes me more, whatever it may be. I deserve this spot. So they start arguing about who's the greatest and who's better than each other. So Jesus wants this last meal with his friends to be a good, intimate time, and they're arguing with each other about who's better or who's worse. And so this takes place. This comment, and this wasn't the first time they argued about this either. All throughout the Gospels, we see moments of Jesus' friends arguing about this. And so they're arguing about this, and Jesus sees this take place. He's the leader with the highest status, and they're arguing about who's more important than the other. And so what Jesus does is he shows them who's more important. We see in John 13 another account of this Last Supper. This is what it says. John 13 says this in 2 through 5. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped the towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them from it with a towel that was wrapped around him. And so normally what would happen is there'd be a guest at the house, and they would wash the guest's feet. But for some reason, that servant wasn't there. Maybe that person was with his or her family for that festival, so there was no servant to wash the feet. And so as the apostles are arguing with each other, they have these disgusting, dirty feet because they walk around in open sandals on dirt roads. It's kind of gross. Animals just kind of walk freely, and so they just drop their droppings wherever. So it wasn't a pretty scene. So feet got really dirty. And so when you went to someone's house, especially as you were laying down eating, your feet was around other people's bodies, which is gross. And so this servant would wash the feet, but that person wasn't there. And so Jesus, as his friends are arguing about who's greater, who's better, whatever it may be, he gets up. Jesus, the Son of God, the Savior of the world, who's about to, his death is just mere hours away. He gets up, puts a towel around his waist, and washes his closest friend's feet. And this is one of the most disgusting jobs someone can do in that culture. And he's down on his hands and knees, washing their muddy, dirty, maybe poop-covered feet, whatever it may be. And Jesus is washing their feet. Now, think about, here's what's crazy about that. The people around this circle that he's washing their feet with, they were his closest friends, but they weren't very good friends at certain points. In fact, in a few hours when Jesus is arrested, almost all of them would scatter out of fear. They see their best friend, their leader, get arrested, and they get terrified of what's going to happen to me, so they ran away. On top of that, Peter, who's one of Jesus' closest friends, always had this tendency to say, Jesus, I'm with you, whatever you need, I'm with you, I'm with you, I'm with you. And in a few hours, Peter would deny that he even knew Jesus 3 times. And then also in that circle was a man named Judas. And just in a moment after this meal, Judas would go and betray Jesus that would lead to his arrest, his trial, and his death for just a little bit of money. So around this circle, he had friends that would betray him, lead to his death, would deny that he even knew it, that they even knew Jesus. And Jesus is still on his hands and knees washing his friends' feet. And so we see is the guy who's at the head of the table doesn't argue about who's greater, who's least. He just gets up and he serves those around him. This is what it means. And this is what Jesus, the example that he said, because after he washed his disciples' feet, he told them, you go and do the same thing for other people. This is the life that you live when you follow me. What Jesus did here is he invited people into his life. There was no exceptions. He invited all people into his life, and they had a seat at the table of his life. They had a place, they had a relationship in his life. And as the head of the table of his life, as the leader of his life, he chose to serve all. Now here's how it fits with us. We, you and me, we're the head of the table of our own lives. Like we're in charge. You get that? Like we can do whatever we want. We choose who we invest in or not. We choose the relationships that we have or not. We are the head of the table of our lives. But we need to be following the same example of Jesus to get down and serve just like he did. For us, when we go into this holiday season, we need to trust in this leading that Jesus set the example of. You see, when he was done with his followers, he called them to do the same thing. And so we are called to serve just like Jesus did. And so I know this season, this holiday season, can be very stressful. The people we deal with are not always easy to deal with. Sometimes they suck life away from us. But before we worry about all the people we're going to deal with over this holiday season, the first person we have to worry with and deal with is ourselves. If we want to go through this season and not just get through it and not just feel exhausted from it, but actually to have a blessed season, a season where we are thriving in our relationships and thriving in our lives, we need to first look at ourselves. Because when it comes to relationships in our lives, there's lots of things that we can't control. We can't control how people think. We can't control how people act. We can't control what they say to us, what they do to us, how they treat us. But as the head of the table of our own lives, as the leader of our lives, we can choose how we handle those relationships in our lives. And so here's what Jesus did, and here's what we should follow when it comes to this season of being the head of the table. First thing we should be doing is this. We need to invite people into our lives. This is what Jesus did. Now, here's something I know about all of us. All of us are busy. All of us are tired, which is probably why I lost my voice. It's really easy in that time, guys, to just say, you know what? I don't have time for people. I don't want to deal with people. I don't want to build relationships. I don't want to just mess. I don't want to spend more of my energy on dealing with people who can suck the life out of me. But here's the key. I know we're too busy. I know we're too tired, but here's the truth of how God wired us. Relationships and community, they give us life. They give us purpose. They give us meaning. Too often we don't invite people into our lives because of just the stresses that we have inside our lives of work and family, and we're so exhausted from just that stuff, we have no time or no energy to invite others into it. But that's not how we're designed. You see, Jesus had a family too, and Jesus was doing work. He was, saving the world, which is kind of a big job, and so he's busy with that, but what he always did is he invited people into his life. Even while he dealt with problems with close friends, he dealt with problems from family, he dealt with problems from strangers, Jesus still looked to fill his table with other people. And we should do the same thing in this season. We need to invite people into our lives. The second thing Jesus did is he spent time with them. Something we're going to see throughout this series was that Jesus gave time to people. No, I don't know about you guys. I don't have much spare time in my schedule. I think we all can relate to that. And so because of that, we don't really think about giving time to more people that are already in place. So the idea of going to someone over this next season and saying, you know what, I'm going to make more time. I'm going to adjust my schedule. I'm going to do something in my life so I can spend time with you. That takes effort. That takes purpose. But this is something we need to do because Jesus did that all the time. He was a busy man, but when he came across people, he gave them time. He built into those relationships. But what if we're losing life? Not because of all the craziness that we have around us. What if life feels exhausting because we're not spending time with more people? That may seem weird because we feel like we don't have time for people. But the truth is, when we do, that's when we start getting life more based off how God has designed us. And so for this to happen, we need to invest in those relationships, even the relationships that may be difficult in this season. So we need to spend time with people. And the third thing we need to be doing is we need to serve the people in our lives. The way of Jesus is not to have people serve you, but to you to serve others. But many times our relationship with others get difficult because of unmet expectations. People don't act the way you want, don't treat you the way they want, don't serve you the way they want. There's miscommunication, there's disrespect. And because of that, those relationships tend to break down. But what if the way to combat that is not by pulling away from relationships, but by moving towards them with the heart to serve? What if the way we build relationships better is by moving into them with the intention to serve the people around us? What if we do that by blessing them, by respecting them, by loving people around us, not necessarily for who they are, but because of how God has treated you first, how God has loved you first? Because here's the truth. People can't take away your life if you already freely give it away. If you're already giving your life away to other people, those people that can suck the life out from you, they can't do that anymore because you're already giving it up as an act of service to them. And so just like Jesus, we need to be serving the people around us. Jesus did this for us so that we could live the life that he's called us to. And so Jesus got down from his high, lofty place as God, came down to this earth not to be served, but to serve. And he showed that in his relationships, and he ultimately showed that in his death and resurrection. If we want to see God's heart for us, we simply just look at Jesus. And what we see in Jesus is a God who didn't come to be served, but to serve others. And he served us ultimately through his death and resurrection. He laid down his life so that you and I could have life. We didn't deserve it, we didn't earn it, but this is what he did. And it's there that should lead us to acknowledge, to love, and worship Jesus, but also should impact the way we love and acknowledge other people. Tim Keller says this when it comes to understanding this. He says, to the degree you grasp what Jesus did for you and rest in the salvation he bought for you, to that degree this pattern of substitutionary sacrifice and love will be reproduced in your relationships. So what he's saying there is this: the more we trust and understand Jesus and follow him and know that no matter what we've done, Jesus gave up his life for us, it will then lead us to go and love other people with the same mentality. That it doesn't matter what they've done, doesn't matter what they deserve, that we're going to give them love and grace and forgiveness because of what Jesus has first done with us. And this is the life we need to be living, especially going into this season. So here's the challenge I want to give to us as a church over this next month. I want to challenge us to do a couple things a week for a month to see and just follow Jesus into this mentality of how we can serve other people. Here's something I want us to do. Once a week for the next month, I want us to bless one person. And here's what I mean by that. The word bless just means to add strength to someone's life. So when we say we're going to bless someone, we are going to add strength to their life. And that can be done in a number of different ways. It could be simply writing them a note of encouragement. It could be buying a gift card and sending it to them so their family can have dinner. It could be serving them by raking the leaves in the yard, whatever it may be. I want you guys to think about this and say and make this commitment that once a week that you're going to bless someone, but you have to bless somebody outside of your immediate family because you should be blessing each other anyway as your family. But maybe it's a neighbor, a coworker, an extended family member, someone that you know. Once a week, be purposeful at blessing someone outside of your family, okay? And the second thing I want you guys to do is to eat with one person a week that's not your immediate family. Now, this is where it gets hard because we don't have a lot of time. But what will it look like if we all, once a week, made it purposeful? Maybe it was at work or maybe it's a neighbor. We invited them in to say, hey, let's have a meal this week together. Maybe it's a quick half-hour lunch. That's fine, but it's a chance to build into their lives and allow them into your life as well. Because it's here that we invite people into our table. It's here that we spend time with them. It's here that we serve them in those moments. Now, this may be difficult because a lot of us are busy. So here's my challenge for you guys. Go home today. Take a moment, and if you're married, talk with your spouse and go, okay, how are we going to do this? Who are the people that we're going to bless every single week from here on out for the next month to see what happens? And who are the people that we're going to eat a meal with? Even though we're busy, even though life's chaotic, how can we follow Jesus into investing into relationships by having a meal with them? Because I know this next season is busy. But as the head of the table of our own lives, we should get down and serve just like Jesus did. We should invest in those relationships just like Jesus did. Because here's the one thing. We need to follow Jesus into relationships, not away from them. It's really easy when life gets stressful to just say, you know what, I don't have time for this right now. But the way of Jesus is to move into people's lives because that's what he did for us. Jesus moved into our lives to know us, to love us so that we could know how much he loves us and have this life that he offers us. And this is important because this is how God wired us to be. It's in relationships that we get a better picture of who God is and the life that he has for us. It's in serving in those relationships that our lives are going to be changed to become more like Jesus. And the lives of others are going to be changed too because we're loving them like Jesus. And so here's the challenge. I know you've just put up with me and I'm thankful for that. But I want us to remember the reason we do this, the reason we gather and listen to a ridiculous sounding preacher is not because of anything that we've done individually, but all because of what Jesus did himself. That Jesus came, he lived among us, he laid down his life for us so that you and I could have life. And it's in that we need to give our lives away to other people and serve like Jesus did. And so in this moment, I want us to remember who Jesus is. And know that as we're going through this season and we're dealing with all these craziness of the holidays, the busyness, the traffic, the rude shoppers, the family and friends that maybe we don't want to deal with, but we have to because, it's Thanksgiving and Christmas. I want us to remember who Jesus is. That Jesus is the head of the table, the most important being in this universe. He didn't consider that to be something he would be used to his advantage, but he got down from his throne and served us. He washed his friends' feet, and he laid down his life for us. And so each week we remember that through communion. And so we're going to worship in this next song together of who Jesus is. And after that, we're going to take communion together to remember, you know what? The God of the universe got down and served so that we can have life. And that's what we're called to do as well. Let's pray. God, thanks so much for today. Thank you for who you are, what you've done. And God, I take my voice for granted, and today it's not fully there. But you are. And no matter what we're dealing with, no matter what difficulties or frustrations we have, you love us, and you came and you served us. So God, help us to remember that as we go through this next season of life, of the holidays and the craziness, that we can get really stressed out because of the people in our lives. But God, help us to serve in those moments, to love in those moments, and to follow your Son into those moments. In your name we pray. Amen.